Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to Content Optimization Technology. We're thrilled that you're joining us for today's discussion, and we have a lot of great things to share with you today. So joining me on this webinar, our special guest, hang on a second, we're going to go there, Lindsey Treloar. Lindsey is the Enterprise Account Director for Acrolinx. Now what that means is she spends a lot of time on the topic of content optimization, working with big clients, their challenges, understanding their pain points, and working across a wide range of different departments, from marketing teams to technical communication teams to localization teams. Lindsey's done it all. So Lindsey, we're thrilled you're joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Steve. Hi, everybody.
And my name is Steve Roeder. I'm the CMO of Acrolinx, and excited again that we're able to share this topic with you. And it's something that's really exciting. And in terms of just background, we're going to start off with a kind of a gift, if you will, 4 great resources that we're going to follow up with, so you don't have to worry about taking diligent notes and screenshots and things like that. Of course, you're more than welcome to, but you don't have to. So as part of the follow-up email that you get for attending, we're going to send you 4 things. First is our Global Content Impact Index. This is something that we released early part of last year, where we researched over 340 global brands and their overall content quality. We're going to be referencing some of that data during today's presentation, so we want to make sure we get you a full copy of the report. The second thing is our Global Content Impact Index that we produced in the latter part of last year, which was really focused on content consistency, and we'll be referencing some of the research findings there as well, so we'll make sure we get you that. Plus, you're going to get all the slides, so we'll make sure those are available via SlideShare, and a recording, so you'll get a full recording of the demo in case you want to share this with friends and coworkers, and or just watch it again over the weekend, because it's going to be a lot of fun. So with that, here's our agenda. We're going to cover 3 things. One is we're going to talk about the challenges facing every business. And when we say every business, any organization that lives and breathes kind of content today, and that spans large companies, multinationals, and even small companies are really caught up in this need to create great content. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to point you to some new technologies, and this is where we're going to get specific into what is this idea of content optimization and how can technology be applied to that particular challenge. And then the third thing is just resources to learn more. We're going to give you some things that you can walk away with and you could consider implementing literally today if that's something that you wanted to do. So with that, our theme for this is going to be a little bit oriented around these 3 puppies, and as cute as they are, they're fighting for the toy, and they're pulling in opposite directions. And in many ways, as we think about these challenges today that people face in their content teams, it feels a lot like this picture, where this idea that creating consistent content, yet personalizing that content, and doing that at any sort of scale, they're diametrically opposed to each other. We can't do all 3, so we have to do one. And what we're going to talk about today is just some industry data around each of these 3 things, but ultimately leading to the fact that you can do all 3. You can do all 3 of these things, and quite successfully. And as we wrap up today's presentation, we're going to talk about some large companies that are actually doing this. And so keep this image in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. So first topic, consistency. Let's just talk about an interesting challenge, and I put a couple of images on the screen here as we think about these logos. And immediately, or almost immediately, many of you are saying, "There's something wrong here. That is not Apple's logo. It's slightly distorted and squished." Or some of you might have looked at Coca-Cola and you might have said, that's just not the way Coca-Cola wants to be represented. That's not their brand. And for marketers especially, but in just about any person that's involved in content creation, that creates an immediate sense of anxiety. Well, as we think about the language that you use and the language that kind of is part of your content, that same thing happens with your audience. That same sense of anxiety happens when they read something that is just off-brand for your tone, your style, your voice, for your company. And in many ways, it can be just as detrimental to your customer experience. So as we think about this topic of consistency, keep this in mind, because in many ways, companies focus on the brand aesthetics, but they often don't do a great job at focusing on the brand voice and consistency there and what that means. And a great quote from Gartner on this, and they're doing some fantastic research on this idea of customer journey and buyer consistency. And the quote here is, in the game of customer experience, consistency will always trump delight. And the idea essentially is that a consistent voice, a consistent journey is going to be infinitely better than those one or two home run viral videos or something that kind of takes off and puts your brand on the map, but doesn't sustain that journey over the long run. And there's been some really solid research on this. If you look at this one report, this is just focusing on financial services, but I think this would hold true across multiple industries, where we look at, and this is from McKinsey, they looked at two things, customer satisfaction and consistency. And they said, okay, well, let's look at the correlation between companies that have this kind of experience, low consistency with that buyer journey across all the different touch points. Not only their content, but their, the product materials and their user manuals and all of those things, and compare that to the companies that have a very kind of high, very high quality customer experience and highly consistent customer experience. And there was almost a one-to-one correlation. You can see that the companies that had that very consistent customer experience were driving very high customer satisfaction scores. So that going to let Lindsey talk about some of these, these interesting facets that we uncovered in our report as we think about specifically how this relates to the content that's out there today and how it really is focused on or challenged with this idea of creating consistent buyer journeys. So Lindsey, you want to share with us your thoughts on this latest report?
Sure, thanks, Steve. So we used our own software to have a little look into this kind of research that we've seen by Gartner and by McKinsey, and wanted to really see, well, how are people doing in terms of their websites and the information that's available online that all the users and customers are using as part of their customer journey. And what we concluded was that there were a lot of very inconsistent information online. So 54% of the scores that we found basically showed inconsistencies across different types of content that we were able to analyze, and 46% showed consistencies. So 40%, 46% at this stage, you could say, well, perhaps that's not so bad, about half of them are consistent. But then we delved a little deeper to see, okay, well, you can have consistent kinds of content, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's consistently good. And when you take a little more of a deeper look into the scores, we actually found that only 19% of the companies who had consistent content were actually high-quality consistent content. And the rest, as you can see in this graph, either had inconsistent and low quality or extremely inconsistent and low quality. So it was really a bit of a shocker to sort of see, well, with this kind of information, this kind of consistency levels, where people are standing on the web identifiable information. So what we found, if we then look at the kind of customer journey in a different way, and I did this with one of my customers, a large company who have basically a lot of different departments who are all creating content, and really had a tremendous pressure to speak consistently, but they weren't working very well together in terms of the way that they communicated and the voice and the tone and that kind of thing, and really have thousands of different products which people in product marketing are writing for, but also people in within communications, people who were writing about the products, how they work once you've bought them, and it just really felt like for the customer that the customer journey needed to be looked at, and we came up with this graph seeing different areas where the customer could read the information from the company, and we gave a score to each of the different touch points that they might come across. And as you can see here, we've got a beginning point with a pretty high quality score of 81, but then you continue on to a different page, read a little bit more about the product, and then suddenly there's different feeling to it, maybe a different person has written it and writes in a very different style. And then they move on to another page and another page, all to try and gather some information before the buying point of buying. And the journey is just inconsistent, and you can tell that when you have the different kind of information written by different people. So they needed to address this and come up with some kind of way to be more consistent for the buyer. I really like this one. This is I think unfortunately true for a lot of people. Our highest priority is satisfying our customers, except when it's hard, unprofitable, or we're busy. And when are we not busy? So this is the thing where people are starting to realize that actually there's a big discrepancy between what the customer is reading and how it feels across that different points of the customer journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how, when you show that one chart, Lindsey, about the, that lumpy buyer journey, this is really where it gets hard for a lot of companies because of entrenched silos and departmental divisions, and it's really hard to bridge those gaps and say we want to have high quality, consistent content at every step of this buyer journey, whether it's technical communications or our marketing content or our training or our corporate communications. But the reality is your customers don't see org charts, and they don't see those silos. They just experience your content in a kind of seamless flow. And I think it's this cartoon, I think, really kind of summarizes that challenge, because this is one of the hardest things we've seen customers wrestle with, is just getting different departments and different divisions on the same page. So let's talk about the next big challenge. So this, puppy number one was consistency, but I think that the next one here is personalization, and how do you create this buyer journey that is not only consistent, but in many ways speaks to that audience, because most companies, in fact, many companies, present today, I know you're dealing with lots and lots of buyers, different personas, different audiences. And what's interesting as we think about this particular topic is, I'll share a couple of graphics. One is just this idea of a buyer journey, and we'll love to talk about the buyer journey. You could probably hear it 100 times in most companies, and unfortunately, that perspective that happens when people say this is they often think about it as this kind of neat, orderly progression, from general awareness to purchase, conversion, and loyalty, advocacy, and so forth. And the reality is, it's very different. And Aaron Provey, I think, best articulates this in a diagram that looks a little bit like a kind of a twisted hairball here, where that buyer journey today, and think about your own individual experiences as you were exploring either a major purchase like a new TV or car, or something that you did a fair amount of research on. You don't kind of follow this nice orderly path. You follow this very twisted kind of turning of things, and each one of those little kind of loops back toward the middle is an inflection point. In many cases, those are pieces of content that either bring you in or kind of shoot you out in another direction. And it's fascinating to try to think about the way in which search engines and Google and the distribution of content beyond even the kind of the traditional website structure has really changed the way consumers, buyers, get information about your products and services. So the reality is it looks a lot more like this, but unfortunately many companies are still kind of locked into this. It's a world where you see really high quality, glossy kind of information on the front end, and then behind the scenes it's dull white, plain black and white, and confusing and boring. And I think in many cases the companies that are really leading this customer experience charge, those organizations that are really thinking about this, have figured out that technical content is just as critical for pre-sales as it is post-sale customer support, post-sale loyalty. It's a critical piece of that buyer journey, and it happens in many cases, way beyond that, or way before that purchase decision is ever made. So, Lindsey, we want to, we want to dig into one of the other research pieces here and share a little bit more about content quality, because ultimately, when it comes down to things like personalization, quality is at the heart of it. And love to get your perspective on this piece of research, and then just share with our audience, again, some of the results from those findings.
Sure, sure. I just have one little example when you're showing the last slide with the differences between before and after sale documentation. I decided to invest last year in a Vespa to get around Berlin, and obviously Vespa is nice and shiny and new. It's quite a brand. There were cheaper versions of a Vespa, but I went all in, and I had a problem with it. And I have the manual, which looks quite like that black and white version. But the funny thing was that it was half translated from the Dutch and into English, but only half of it. And there was the words were all stuck together, so you couldn't really read them. And it was just I couldn't use the manual whatsoever. And I was really, really surprised, because I just thought, well, Vespa's the high-end brand version of these kinds of machines, and I'd expected it to be high quality, and it was really the opposite, and it's dented my idea of the Vespa. If I'd have, that's something that that for now, for example, I've told friends about, and if they're considering buying a Vespa, I'm not sure if they'll have a look at probably the alternatives where they have better help.
Well, it's amazing, and I would say I challenge the audience on the call today. Think about your own technical and support related content, and are you doing the same thing? Are you creating this potential where your brand is diminished in the eyes of the audience? You can't really go back in time and imagine what would happen, but imagine you heard this story from a colleague before you purchased that Vespa, Lindsey. Would you have made the same purchase decision, or would you have been a little bit more suspicious about the quality of the product?
I would have, and I would have done some more research also online with people, in forums, or looking at troubleshooting, or on the page where they have customer support and stuff, to sort of see what information is out there, and if it seems to be consistent in terms of are they telling the same story, and do I feel like I'll be looked after, or if I have some issues, that the information's available.
Yeah.
So I do that with some other products now.
Good. Well, how about the research? How did this research line up with that experience that you had with Vespa?
Yeah, so pretty well actually. What we did, it was in last year, is to rate a whole load of different websites and the content, to see if there was a score or a threshold where we could find for quality levels. So it was a huge amount. It was about 120 million words, and as you can see, various web pages from some of the biggest companies around the world. And what we did was to then see via the Acrolinx software where they scored on a level of 1 to 100. And the very surprising and not so great result was that 2/3 came under the certain threshold level we found with our experience with customers, which is decent quality, which is about a level of 72. So what we say is that 72 and above as a score, when you look at various different parts of the language and style in writing, is okay quality. And anything below that is going to be inconsistent, and it's going to be incorrect things coming up. And this was publicly available information on websites, right? So 31% of all of those 340 companies and millions of words was at a decent level of content quality. So there's clearly an issue, and it wasn't just it wasn't just in one area. It was also all over the place. So in Americas, EMEA and APAC, as you can see here on the slide, all had an issue with quality. So a little bit of variance there, but I mean, I'm based in Germany. They were just below the threshold. UK, where I'm from, even further below. It's something which is happening everywhere. It doesn't seem to be specific to one location, region, or industry type, in fact.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, most people are probably sitting there going, well, okay, fine, I didn't get as good of score as I thought. Does it really matter? Is there really an impact? And I'll tee up the next slide and say, certainly, we found that it does have a direct impact. This is directly related to business results every step of the way.
Right, exactly. So there's we've seen the various different studies, as you mentioned before, but also looking at this graph, the green lines representing better quality is actually showing that the website traffic increases with better quality content, and poorer quality has fewer websites visits. So this is talking about and starting to get towards conversion, where some of my customers are really measuring the ongoing conversion rates and ROI, and trying to have a look at, okay, well, if we have decent content, where does that lead us later down the line? Well, if you have a million less website views, that's a million less potential buyers if you're sort of turning off very early on because of some issue with the grammar or spelling, which is really a turn off. So it's quite an interesting graph to see the correlation there.
Now, I know we're going to get into this a little later on in the presentation, but for the audience that might not be familiar with this idea of scoring, this is really more kind of a 360-degree view of your content. It's not just, I think, what people are most familiar with in terms of, spelling and grammar check, but this is deep kind of language, deep analytics on the language, the readability, the voice, the sentence length, the word choice. I mean, this is really kind of complex linguistic analysis that helped derive these scores. It certainly isn't just company A had a few more spelling errors and misplaced commas, right? So, and sorry, Lindsey, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the other adverse effect of poor quality content, but it can certainly have an effect on your family pets if you're not careful.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. This is just kind of a humorous example of obviously how misplaced punctuation can lead to very different interpretations of material. So, with that, we're going to talk about the very last pain point, and then we're going to transition over to what can you do about it, and how does content optimization technology really work? What does it look like? How does that work within my company? But the last area that a lot of organizations struggle with is scale, and it's it's no wonder, right? I mean, there's some amazing research on this. If you look at some findings from the Content Marketing Institute, this was research that they put out every year with marketing profs, and the #1 challenge for organizations, at least in last year's survey, was producing enough content. And that is absolutely something that we hear all the time. I know, Lindsey, as you work with customers, there's no shortage of organizations and stress on those organizations that are thinking about how can they produce and keep up with this insatiable demand for content. And again, that's across the board, whether it's marketing content, whether it's kind of more social, community-oriented content, whether it's technical content. It runs the gamut, and we see this as we talk to organizations, and this has led to a lot of interesting dynamics in those companies. One is that the rate of content creation has gone up incredibly, but also a high degree of outsourcing and third-party agencies being involved in that content production process. Also, great alternative for helping supplement your internal resources, but also present some unique dynamics. And what was interesting is, as the Content Marketing Institute did that research, again, they also found that there's some more top challenges. This year's results really focused on this idea of engaging content, and again, I think this really speaks to this tug of war that we see between quality and quantity, and as we think about this, what does it mean for audiences? So with that, I'm going to, Lindsey, if you want to walk through maybe I think what is a very common scenario that most of our audience will be able to relate to.
Yeah. So what we're seeing is that really up to 70% of a customer's journey is driven by content. We all know that the content is very important, but trying to communicate between departments, as Steve mentioned, it can be very siloed, and there's not always great communication between departments. So you have a lot of content being produced, and it's created throughout the organization by different departments who are based in different locations. You've got marketing and sales, tech, communications, support, agencies externally, etc. And that just creates really a lot of challenges to get high quality and consistent content out of the door on time. And that problem just magnifies when you have more and more people producing that content, contributing to it internally and externally. And what we're seeing everywhere is content's needed yesterday, right? So it needs to go out the door quicker. And there are usually very ambitious time to market goals, and a lot of companies moving to agile processes even outside of the software area. So it's pretty tough if you have a product release which needs to ship with documentation in 20 different languages, and you get the last sort of final parts of the product being ready, a week before it's supposed to be shipped, for example. That's very tight on time. So that consistency and quality level of writing becomes very tricky.
Absolutely, and if you're sitting, listening to this and saying, yeah, that's my business, that's my problem, and I really want to be able to get some data to further support our challenges to senior management that might not be aware that this is as critical. I want to point you to a really good resource, and this is a research initiative that is from Forbes, and it's called CMO's Publisher Parish. And it's really designed to be a roadmap for CMOs, and we've created a series of blog posts highlighting pieces of this research that we felt were most relevant for our audience, and you can find that on our website under the blog. It was published, I think, in January and early February. We did a couple of different posts, but I'll give you the highlights, and it really is the research that they did where they measured the fact that as content requirements, and kind of looking at this list on the left, and I'll talk about that first bullet point, for example. Advanced marketing approaches require more content, and if you kind of follow that logic chain down, the demand for content is rising, most content lacks a coherent structure, but that curve on the right, if you can kind of focus on that, you see this just immense increase in terms of the cost per asset going up and up and up, and ultimately Forbes made some recommendations in terms of here are the tools and technologies that organizations should be considering, and we were thankful that Acrolinx was mentioned as one of the top technologies to be considering, and it ties directly to this last point and what we're going to cover in the rest of the presentation, which is this idea that content governance and control is nearly impossible at scale. And if you think about, getting everybody to use the same brand terms, style guide, rules, and so forth in a world that is changing so rapidly across different departments, divisions, geographies, languages, and possibly business units and even agencies, it really is nearly impossible at scale, to use the words from Forbes. So, with that, we're gonna shift gears, and we're gonna make a pretty sharp turn away from kind of the thought leadership industry data, very specifically to what is content optimization technology and how does it work? What does it look like? This is very specific to Acrolinx and what we do. This is what we've been doing for over 10 years. So we're pretty excited about this topic as well. And with that, Lindsey, I think you're going to take us through an overview, and then we'll wrap this up with some customer examples on how this is actually working for companies today.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Acrolinx, how it works and how it looks. This is just showing you a few of our customers who we work with. We've been around since 2002 when we first became a company out of the German Artificial Intelligence Institute, together with SAP as our first customer. And basically, we realized together with them that there was something missing in terms of big companies who have a lot of people writing, have a lot of different style guides, and are really struggling to implement the tone and the voice and the way they wanted to write. So we started with SAP and sort of grew from there, and have a lot of different customers in manufacturing and high tech and consumer products, etc. So just a little cross-section of the different industries we're working with there to try and help them have a more consistent and content altogether. So The way that Acrolinx actually works is that it reads the content that you write and it helps you with guidance to make it better. So what you're seeing here is a little sidebar integration within a MS Word document where somebody has written some text and has clicked a little tool with Acrolinx and is being brought up a whole bunch of different issues which would make the text better once they're applied. So you just see a few different options coming up in terms of spelling, of different, the wrong use of terms that are company relevant, things that make the text more readable. One of the options just there on the right is something about sentence too long. Well, you want people to be able to read and understand your quality, the content that you're producing, and the longer your sentence, the more convoluted and difficult to understand it becomes. So you get a couple of different options popping up inside of your authoring environment. And then moving on from there, you have, well, basically a whole load of different ways to check that information that you're producing. We try to be wherever you are producing content. So we have a lot of different integrations in different authoring tools, which make it nice and easy for you to create the content that you are writing. So Word is one that I mentioned, and then there's various different XML and more technical editing authoring environments. And what we do then at the very beginning, once you've clicked this little Acrolinx symbol, is to give you a score. So you get a general view of, well, how good is this quantity, the quality of the document at the moment, and then perhaps you'll have a 72 crop up, and then you can go into the individual issues and options and improve them. And we come up with that score based on a whole bunch of different algorithms and looking at different rules, linguistic rules that a lot of very clever linguists programmed behind the scenes, and basically make suggestions for how you can increase that score, have a better sound, have a better consistency. When you've clicked that away, then you can have a scorecard which goes into more detail. So here you'll see the scorecard says at the top by quality 81, so 81 out of 100, and then there are various categories which it's being measured on. For example, the terminology, the spelling, the grammar, style, and reuse. I'll go into this a little bit more in a second, but basically giving you a really quick, nice visual overview of, well, where is my content lacking, where have I got the most issues, or what do I need to do to make it better. So when we then go on to the next part, then you start to delve into each of the different categories. One of the categories which is quite exciting and a lot of people are liking, especially within the marketing departments, for example, and communications departments that work with Acrolinx, is the voice scores. So we can give you feedback in terms of how readable is your content, how formal is it, and really help you to pitch and to write with the correct persona, the correct target audience. And I think that's a really tricky thing to do, and very useful to get information on, well, do we need it to be more lively or not? And depending on the type of document and your target audience, you may want it to be technical, or you may want it to be very informal and lively, and that can be adjusted for you. So in terms of working with the tool, it's always useful to understand how things are going once you've started working, and we have a whole bunch of metrics and statistics to help you track the content quality, the trends, the utilization of the tool, and the performance. So really looking at where are our main issues, what do we need to do better, how can we continue to improve it and make sure that the implementation is actually being a success for you. Okay. So one of the things which I wanted to show is just a little part of the functionality of Acrolinx is something called reuse. What we can find quite often is that there are very different ways of saying the same thing. And this is an example from a customer who discovered with Acrolinx that they were writing, please enter an actual start date earlier than the end date in 39 different ways. So, okay, it's a little inconsistent, but if you start to think, well, this is a company that translates into 35 different languages, you can start to see the issues that there might be with a problem like this, with so many different ways of writing the same thing. very, very quickly the costs add up, and the time to market gets longer, having to translate more, which is totally unnecessary. So I think that's just a little bit of an overview of how the platform works, what it looks like, how you could imagine it being in an everyday level within your authoring tool. And then there's various different parts to really managing the process and the metrics. So I'll pass back over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Lindsay. I love this example. I mean, you know, we did something special last year. We did a roadshow with our CEO and then a number of different kind of experts in this field, going throughout North America and Europe, you know, presenting at conferences about, you know, this idea of content quality and what it means to organizations. And one of our customers was there, a customer from Caterpillar, and they talked about how they took one small change and actually mapped it through and followed it, kind of stapled themselves to that content, and said, how many places does this small change actually have an impact, and what was the total cost of this? And it just was absolutely mind-blowing how much a single change had in terms of the downstream localization costs, printing costs, website changes, and it was clear to everyone after that example that this issue, just in terms of consistency and reuse, is something that companies are squandering millions of dollars on. And I love this example just because I think most companies can probably look at their own content and say, yeah, we have a few of these, you know, these skeletons as well, where we just say something differently and it just keeps showing up, and we, you know, how do you get consistent on that? So one thing that's interesting is we about this idea of content optimization technology is, what do you do with it once it's in place? And I think, Lindsay, you illustrated how a writer would use this with you know, that quick access sidebar, tuning and tweaking their content, and that's great. And then how you know, possibly a manager could look at a trend over time. And what we've done is we've essentially designed a maturity model around how you would use content optimization metrics. This is essentially a progression from just getting started to, wow, we're really, you know, firing on all cylinders, and we've got this figured out. And I'm just going to walk through this briefly so people get a sense of not only how the tool works and its use, but how this tends to progress in an organization as it's being deployed. So the level one, kind of just getting started, that everybody just loves is this idea of a scorecard. You're writing content, and all of a sudden, you know, something you never had before, an objective standard on quality and consistency. And again, as Lindsay mentioned, that's thousands of rules being analyzed in terms of style, your style guide rules. It's not just some Acrolinx standard. It's actually the rules that you want. It's your brand terminology and all of those things being kind of captured in that single place, that scorecard. And that's a really great starting point. And people can literally within minutes see how easy it is to gain value with that. Now, the next level up is ultimately rolling that up to managers to look at the you know, this trend over time, and this is really great because managers who are, you know, have a large team of writers, possibly some of those might be agencies. They, you know, this is an easy to deploy tool, so it's something that you could roll out to any of your writers, anybody creating content, and giving them that standard. But you can then see this dashboard where you can get those very specific trend reports on how the different departments, teams, or groups are doing, and it would make it really easy. The other thing that we've invested in is essentially this kind of batch checking technology where you can get a baseline on all your existing content. So if you have a library of content, you know, tens of thousands of documents possibly, you just kind of point Acrolinx at that library, and you can get a baseline score of where it's at today, and then see where you go for improvement. The next level, once people start looking at the individual content scores and the team content scores, is they really start tweaking and tuning the engine. And we didn't really get into the nuts and bolts of that engine behind the scenes, but that brain, if you will, or that Acrolinx engine is incredibly flexible. It can learn your words and phrases, your terminology. It can be adapted, kind of turn rules on and off so that you can capture certain things the way you exactly want. And that's really where there's certain tools within the platform that make it easy to do that. Now, this opens up the door to a whole host of other interesting conversations. And this is really where you get to this kind of level 4 through 6. And it's a couple different levels, and we're not going to get into each of them. But think about this. Once you have this objective score, what do you want to do with that? You want to compare that content quality to business performance. How does this compare to conversion rates on landing pages or click-through rates on shopping cart purchases, or how does it compare to the little like score that customers give you for your technical support content? There's all sorts of fascinating ways you can start correlating content quality to other business performance metrics, and we make it really easy to do that. We don't want to be your system of record for all measurements, but we do provide ways to take that Acrolinx score and export that out into other tools where that analysis is probably better served. So it's just kind of a quick overview of how that works. Now, again, as we talked about this a little earlier, but there are some very tangible benefits of doing all this, right? If you're looking to make a business case for getting this kind of technology implemented in your organization, here's kind of where you need to just tune in and really see there's both improved business performance and reduced costs. And it's pretty obvious when you start standardizing and using that content quality scoring that you can really drive some significant benefits. Now, we've done some interesting research. I'm not going to get into all the details because this is going to be published later this month, but I will give you a sneak preview where we compared low Acrolinx score and high Acrolinx score content in a very kind of contained, isolated research project, and we compared and we looked at three things. We wanted to look at brand trust, the conversion rate on certain types of content, and the likelihood to purchase. And across all of those, the higher quality content score drove a much higher rate of brand trust, conversion rates, and purchases. Now, this for people who are held accountable for certain metrics is huge. And if you think about a marketing team, for example, that has a lead generation goal, well, higher quality content could be a much greater investment than just a few more ad campaigns, or driving a significantly higher purchase rate through better content could be a much more worthwhile initiative than simply trying to create more content. You might be better off creating less at a higher quality, given these kind of results. And on the cost side of the equation, well, I think we have a really strong case for just improved productivity, and I'll talk about this in terms of just writer and editor productivity. First of all, you can see that as the content optimization technology is used, writers can be more productive. They don't have to look up the style guide rules and have these lengthy review cycles where a lot of those corrections could be made before that editorial process takes place. Now, a lot of people look at this initially, and if they're not an editor, they probably say, well, aren't you going to kind of replace those people? They're not going to like this. But the opposite is true. They love this technology because they don't want to get they don't want to spend 90% of their time looking for serial commas and em dashes. They want to really refine the language and the words and the nuanced aspects of writing that they love to do and that they're incredibly good at. So this, in many ways, gives them a kind of a boost in value because they're no longer constrained by just kind of fixing punctuation and capitalization issues that are kind of more easily managed through automation. But obviously, as Lindsey mentioned, as you get better at this with your consistency, the localization costs go down, and then ultimately this all compresses the content delivery time. So wanted to highlight a couple of those, and if you're interested in more of these, we certainly have documentation to support these benefits and customer examples. But you know, we want to shift gears just at the very end here, and you know, talk about two things. One is organizations look at this and say, "Wow, this is really hard. I can't invest in this kind of massive content optimization project." And just want to kind of give you a little bit of peace of mind. This is really easy to deploy. This is not, it's powerful technology, but it's not rocket science. And we've thought of these implementation issues and built out kind of these top 5 things that are these success factors, from the authoring tool integrations to a guidance wizard that reads your content and figures out your kind of starting point terminology, you know, cloud or on-premise deployment options. I mean, this makes it pretty easy for companies to embrace this and be up and running in a few weeks is really what it comes down to. And as Lindsey mentioned, there's some great customer examples. We're going to share a couple of them really quickly, and Lindsey, maybe you could talk about a few of them, and I'll cover one, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. So this is KTM. They are an Austrian motorcycle manufacturer, customer of ours. They have a pretty big turnover. You can see there at the bottom, 1 billion a year, and a lot of employees who are contributing to their content. And their sort of business objective or driver was partly the fact that they were producing content in a lot of different languages with different people, so very different styles and backgrounds and cultures, and really brand reputation, because KTM have premium products and they really wanted to protect their brand, make sure that they were using the brand terms correctly, that they were really projecting a certain image for KTM, and doing that across the different people who were writing the content within the organization and also with agencies. So they really wanted to get good alignment on their terminology, their brand words, and what they did was to form a sort of central team with different people who were contributing to that content, bringing in some SMEs, some subject matter experts, to make decisions on which kind of branding terms they wanted to use. Obviously, someone from marketing and branding was there, but also the people that were writing and producing the products themselves earlier in the process. And they rolled that out so that everybody across KTM has got to use these correct terms in different teams and departments and geographies. So that worked really nicely and was really a brand reputation kind of tool for them. And then another customer of ours I'll just mention as well briefly is Philips, even larger. I think everybody's heard of Philips. They have a 21 billion annual turnover and over 100,000 employees, just split off into a couple of different segments. And we're working with the healthcare, or now health tech side of Philips. And they really started to use us because they had a lot of technical documentation for their different machines, which would do with diagnostics, so CT, MRI, PET, PET, ultrasound machines, which are really, they save lives in the end. They're diagnostic machines and they need to get it right. These machines are extremely expensive to run, and if things are going wrong and documentation isn't clear, then they're really, it's slowing down the health checks of people's lives. So they were very interested in making sure they had high quality technical documentation, and really started out by using Acrolinx for guides and service information and documentation for those kinds of machines, and then rolled out to some other business units to make sure that they were all in alignment. And I think there's a few people on the call probably who work with, or who have worked with STE, Simplified Technical English, in the past, and some of our customers do that. And Philips developed a kind of Philips Technical English in this process, where they found that they didn't need the strictness or sort of a bit of there were some limits with using just STE, so they adapted it for Philip use, and that was very useful for non-native speakers who were writing for these machines. And they shared the global terminology, and it's working really very well.
Nice. It's amazing how some of these large organizations are just, struggle with content quality, and even some of the biggest ones we're talking about have really figured out ways to overcome this. And what's interesting is that, you know, one other customer example that we'll share is IBM. We spoke at a conference with them a few quarters ago, and they've presented at our user conference a number of times. But if you think about the size of IBM and you know, the type of scale that they're dealing with, you'd have to add up all of those companies on the right to equal the number of employees. So Google plus Oracle plus Apple plus Microsoft plus 5 Facebooks. That's what you're talking about when you think about the scale and scope of IBM. So it's kind of funny, but they're doing a great job managing a lot of their technical and marketing content using Acrolinx. And I'll say that one of the things that they've really done in terms of leadership in, and this is certainly a takeaway for the audience today, is this idea of kind of data-driven personas. It's easy to kind of think about your personas as people you write for and their target audience and imagine what they care about, but they're actually using you know, this Acrolinx data to help form those decisions in terms of what are the right voice scores for this particular persona, and what are the, you know, in a large company, especially one that might have both technical and financial and business buyers. Those are very different audiences, all contributing to the sale and success of a single product. So in many ways, those voice scores that Acrolinx can check become a very important part of getting the message right and making sure that it's not only you know, the right words, but also the right tone and style that audience cares about. So so with that, 3 things. One is, if you have any questions, we do have a couple minutes left, and we'd love to hear from you. And you can add those to the chat window in the GoToWebinar interface. We'd love to have your questions, and if we can't get to all of them today, because we have a pretty large group, we could certainly get to them as part of a follow-up process. But one thing we do want to offer, and this is available to everybody on the call. This is what we call a free content analysis, and what this is a great conversation starter within your company. We'll take the Acrolinx engine, just like we did in some of those earlier research reports that Lindsey mentioned. We can point it at any content of your choosing, and we can analyze and score it and just give you kind of a baseline, and you can use this as part of your discussions internally to really kind of you know, say, do we really need this, and or is this something we should be considering? And again, pretty painless. We love to do this because we learn a lot from conversations with companies about what their challenges are, and we would love to do this as well. It's not something that, you know, it doesn't happen in a couple minutes, but usually within a couple of weeks or so, we can you know, we can have a chat about what you're looking to analyze, measure that content, and then get back to you with the results, and from there you can, you know, share it how you see fit. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the call, there are some resources coming your way as a result of the follow-up email that you'll get if you missed this part of the webinar and dialed in a few minutes late. I mentioned this, but we'll call it out again. That everybody on the call, everybody who's registered for this, will receive a link to our research reports that we talked about, the slides that will be available via SlideShare, as well as the recording of this webinar. So if you wanted to play it back for colleagues and coworkers, you can certainly do that. And with that, we have a few minutes for questions, and I'll ask one that's come in, Lindsey, because I think this is something that, given your role and given your background, you probably know most about. But the question was from the audience: is what departments are using this kind of technology? Who in the company really is thinking about this kind of product?
Yeah, that's a fair question. Well, there are loads of different departments. One of our slides earlier on, I think, mentioned a few, but we have a lot of people in technical communications using Acrolinx, but also in support, in marketing, e-learning, training, engineering. I mean, people have external agencies as well, and some people even have the sales team using it for checking things like contracts or presentations before they go out. So really, it's kind of everyone. There's a lot of different departments, and I mean, the best being that if you have several departments really using Acrolinx and trying to be consistent. So what we see is sometimes people begin in one department and then, or one or two departments usually, and then once they've done a sort of rollout at the beginning, start to add users from different departments and shared terminology and so on. So lots of departments, all departments. the answer, I guess.
Well, we have that's a great answer, and I've got one other another question coming in. This is from Christian, who apparently also is a Vespa owner, but he is asking that, is this English only? Is this kind of technology only? Can it only look at English? What are the limitations?
Yeah, that's also a good question. So we look at 6 different languages. The reason for that being, instead of looking at dozens of different languages, we try to help where the source is created, right? And most companies tend to write in 1 or 2 source languages max. A couple of exceptions there. But so the languages that we check and offer guidance for are English, German, French, Swedish, Japanese, and Chinese currently. And those are the ones where we have a lot of source languages being created. And the idea being that if you get your source language correct, that has massive knock-on effects for localization down the road. So if you start to say, well, if I'm writing in English, then my sentences need to be a bit snappier. I want to make sure that everybody is writing in not too long sentences. That'll be a lot easier for people the translation agencies. So start at the source, make sure that's clean, and then you shouldn't have as much need for checking anyway in the translated versions.
Great. Well, we have more questions than we have time to get to. So I think what we'll have to do is we'll have to promise our audience we'll get them some answers via email as part of the follow-up. But again, if you are interested in that free content analysis, you can actually just throw into the chat or the question answer. I'm interested. Please call me. Or on our website, there's a link to request the content analysis. Either way, we'll make sure we get back with you right away. And with that, Lindsey, I'm afraid we're out of time. This has been a lot of fun, and for our audience, we certainly invite you to come back and participate in some of our other thought leadership webinars. We've got a lot planned for the next couple of months, and we frequently write about this topic. So if you're interested, please come back, visit the Acrolinx blog. We have lots of great research for technical content teams, marketing teams, localization teams, and of course always a recommendation to check out our annual conference. It's an online conference, so it's free and easy to get to. So with that, Lindsey, thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing your perspective and expertise on how this is impacting customers out there. And again, for our audience, thank you all for joining us. It's been great, and we look forward to seeing you on another webinar from Acrolinx. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thanks, Steve. Bye.